Yes, my name is Brian Flora. I'm the Chief Operating Officer at Beyond 20. I've been with Beyond 20 since 2006, and since that time, I've had the opportunity to work with a lot of different organizations across public and private sectors, everything from .coms to federal agencies. I've been privileged to be able to teach a lot of ITIL courses, ITIL 2, 3, and 4 on all over the world, but I'm happy to be here today with David.
Good to be here. I'm David Crouch. I'm a senior advisor at Beyond 20, so I spend my days doing a lot of consulting with our clients, teaching a number of courses, and also doing a lot of writing, a lot of blog writing and book writing. And prior to coming to Beyond 20, I spent about 20 years at Johns Hopkins University and Johns Hopkins Hospital, doing a number of things in service management. And a little fun fact about me, if you notice here on the slide, that they call me Lord Baltimore in the office because I live in Baltimore. Turns out that it doesn't work so well when I tell that to my neighbors, but they'll learn eventually, I think.
Indeed. Okay. So I'm seeing some familiar faces here on in the chat. So welcome back for those of you who've been to webinars before. A couple of you folks have been in classes, it looks like, with either me or with David over the past years, and it's always nice to see you guys. For those of you who haven't worked with Beyond 20, you see it up in the top right, our mission is changing work life. So what we really want to do is, through a combination of people and process, we try to make changes in the way people do their jobs, in the hard work of the way work gets done, and to make incremental and sometimes larger changes in the experience that people have at work as a result of that. We are a ServiceNow Elite partner. We're a premier partner with Cherwell Software and Avanti. For those of you in the federal space, we are also an SBA certified women-owned small business and 8A small disadvantaged business. So we can help you out a little bit easier through streamlined procurement that way. But jumping right in, we've already gone through the introductions. What we want to really talk about today is this concept of the responsive automation center. This is the first time we're introducing this concept to the world, so appreciate you guys being here for this today. We're going to talk about that, how we got here, the recent history, some of the guiding principles that we've created around this, and the initial operating model for the responsive automation center. It's new enough, it's not rolling off the tongue for me just yet. And then we'll talk about some next steps. We're going to have a lot of things coming out on this. We've got a pretty robust white paper that'll be published in the next few weeks on this topic, and over the course of the rest of the year, I think you can expect to see a number of webinars on how to get started with this, blog articles, and you'll probably see us at some conferences talking about this as well. But let's kind of jump right in here. So the origin of this idea comes from this notion that we have, between David and I and the rest of the team. We've literally worked with thousands of organizations to adapt and improve service management processes and technology over the last 15 or so odd years, right? And one of the things that we've noticed is that in that time period, and most particularly in the last handful of years, what you've started to see is some pretty radically different models when it comes to service development and service delivery, right? And I'm talking about things like DevOps and site reliability engineering, and of course the now ubiquitous move to cloud, and any number of other new methodologies. That's not an exhaustive list, obviously, but the ways of working on the development and delivery side have changed pretty dramatically in the previous 5, 10, 15 years. And it occurred to us that the service and support side of organizations has not kept up with that, right? That we are still, in a very real way, the prevailing thought leadership on service and support is really built around a 1994 model, right? And it's a little bit tongue in cheek here. We don't really have anything else that we support that's that old, especially in the technology side of things. But we're still kind of working in an old way, and so what we've come to believe is, you see it right there in the title here, is that fundamentally the service desk as we know it today is dead. It really, the tiered model of, a bunch of people sitting in a room, tier 1, tier 2, tier 3, answering phones, handling those kinds of things. I mean, the way that, admittedly, most service desks are still operating today, that model is antiquated and needs to go away, and we need something new. And that is what we're talking about today, which is the new paradigm, which is the Responsive Automation Center. But before we jump into that, I think it is helpful to talk about the history of service and support and kind of how we got here. And I think that'll, give us a good frame of reference for, what we're not doing going forward, right? So David, why don't you give us a little bit of background here with the history of the service desk and service and support?
Yeah, absolutely. Take the time references here to be a bit loose here. We're covering large periods of time, but if we really start, going back to really the 1960s through the 1970s, this is when 1-800 numbers were first introduced and start to become something that companies would use, and really providing a new channel for customers to interact with a company, to ask questions, to receive some level of support. But then as we move forward, so that was somewhat successful for a while. But as we move forward to the 80s and the 90s, technology advances, but also customer expectations have changed. So then we move towards more of a model called something like the help desk. And if you look at, for example, IBM, one of the organizations that first introduces a help desk for technical support, and they're doing this because finally personal computers, PCs, people start to purchase these and start to get into entry-level IT, so to speak, at home. But things don't always go right with your PC. So they found very quickly that people needed a place to call, when they ran into some difficulties. Now, Brian, I know that we all know and love the next one, and this is the one where we spent a lot of our careers, I think.
Yeah, indeed. So, when you get into, ITIL version 2 is released in 2001, right? 2001, they released ITIL version 2, and we have this concept we call a service desk. And the service desk expands on that idea that David's talking about with the help desk, to really introduce this notion that it's really not just a help desk that helps you with technical support, but it's also really the single point of contact, right? That's, in your teaching classes, you really drive that concept home, the single point of contact for basically everything you need from the IT organization. So that includes, your service and support. You've got an incident, something's broken, you need something fixed, but also questions, comments, complaints, surveys, how do I turn off track changes in a Word document, any of those kinds of things. We really wanted to provide this centralized location that was going to be for everything you needed from the IT organization. And that becomes sort of codified in ITIL v2 in 2001. And then in 2007, you've got ITIL 3 that comes out, and we really expand upon that, right? And the service desk really becomes, the face of IT. It's one of the core functions that we talk about in IT operations there. And, we're really doubling down on, the service desk being the owner of the incident management process, the owner of the request fulfillment process, so that not only are they the single point of contact, but really they're the single point of accountability. And they're really owning, the creation of an incident, the logging of an incident, even if it gets escalated to tier 2, tier 3 vendors, all over the organization, a bunch of different teams. You have this single point of ownership at the service desk that is, maintaining communications with the customer, monitoring your achievement of SLAs, and all that sort of thing. And there's really a lot of pretty, robust material built out around that. And yeah, as David, said, David and I met in an ITIL class that I was teaching, however many years ago. It must have been maybe 2009, 2010,
Don't
something
date
like.
me.
Yeah, something like that. And then, both of us were authors on ITIL 4 on the digital and IT strategy volume. So, we've been pretty close to that, to the ITIL way of thinking for a really long time. That gets doubled down on in the ITIL 2011 edition, that comes out, strangely enough, in 2012. And we keep moving forward on that, even into present day, that's still more or less the operating model that ITIL talks about is this service desk, the tiered service desk, tiered support model, escalations, owning the incident management process there at tier 1, and really drilling down on that single point of contact. But now we're moving into, like we're saying before, we think that's an antiquated model, and it's time to move on to this idea of responsive automation center and increased use of automation to provide a customer experience that's much more in line with what people expect today. So, David, what's wrong with the existing support models? Like, why are we declaring this dead? What's the problem with this?
Yeah. I mean, when you think about it, the single point of contact service desk from a customer's perspective did make some sense during that time period, right? If I'm an end user, I don't necessarily know who to get to in IT. I know I have a buddy over here in IT who might help me sometimes. So to prevent that sort of, if you will, shadow IT or going to your best friend, it made some sense to find, to have one single point of contact who could say, well, if I can't resolve the issue myself, I know who to send it to. But you know what? Times have moved on, and there were some I think challenges with the existing support model. I mean, for one, when you have a single point of contact and when you also have tiered escalations, you run into delays, right? I mean, have you ever, I'm sure that you've been there, we all have been, you've called a service desk and you've spent some time on the phone with an agent who, maybe can't resolve your issue, and then they have to hand it off to another team. And how long would you say it takes for that other team to get back to you?
However long, it's too long, right?
Yeah. I mean, it could be
Yeah.
hours, it could be days sometimes. So then you have a handoff, and every time you have a handoff, there's the possibility that one, that information gets lost in that handoff. There's something that's missing, and then that tier 2 has to call you back and say, what is it that's going on here? And I see some chats in here literally just getting a message about this, right?
Yeah.
But from a customer perspective, that's not going to make me real happy. There's a delay. I have to potentially repeat what I've already said. So I'm not going to be real satisfied, let alone, going to that level to be engaged. I mean, how many folks, even with great services, how many times do you have your customers saying, I just love my service desk? I've got to send them another compliment.
Yeah, not so much. And it raises an interesting point too, that because of those delays and because of the handoffs and so on that you get there, we talk about the service desk being that, you beat the drum about the single point of contact. You go to the service desk, you open up a ticket, we've got this model that's very prescriptive and so on. But what do users actually do? They 9 times out of 10, given the option, they call their favorite IT person directly. As soon as they figure out the tier 2 or tier 3 person that can solve that problem, they're not going to tier 1, and if they can avoid it. Or you've got the hallway conversation, right? They grab somebody in the hallway. Hey, by the way, while you're out here, can you fix this ticket? And then they don't get logged. They don't, you have all the issues that go along with that.
Yeah, and beyond just the customer or the user experience, the other thing is, from an efficiency perspective, it not only slows us down, but it's pretty expensive, right? If you're the CIO, you're probably looking at costs and you're thinking, well, I have all these people on my service desk, and now every time I have to escalate to another tier, that's probably a more expensive resource, right?
Yeah.
And there used to be all these models for on average how much that would cost. So it can be super expensive as well. I think from my perspective, it's fair to say that even in the best cases, even if you're doing like, you know, the the shining version of the ITIL, ITIL single point of contact type service desk, there were still, these major downsides to the model that are still persisting in a lot of organizations today. But I guess the big driver from my perspective is when you think about it from the point of what is your end user, what does your customer want? I mean,
Yeah.
from your perspective, Brian, you've seen this as well. What do customers generally want in terms of how they want to receive IT support?
No, I mean, you're absolutely right. That is the number one driver that, really got me, and I think a lot of the other folks thinking about this. And, I'm going to go ahead and apologize in advance because I can see some of our friends from some of our telecom customers on the phone, and I apologize for using some examples here that I hope will not be offensive. But, when I think about my my internet connection at home, right? When you're talking about whether it's Cox or Comcast or Time Warner or whoever that provides this for you, you think about what experience you want with the service and support from that organization, right? And that's where we got to this idea that there is sort of a hierarchy of customer experience that's really based on here in 2023, what kind of a support experience we as clients actually want, and what it takes to be a satisfied customer. So the first thing that we think about is that, like, at the very top of the pyramid, the highest level of customer experience that I can have, my highest level of customer satisfaction, is simply something that doesn't fail in the first place, right? That we're getting into high availability, and we'll talk more about this later, but I think we can just about safely say that we've gotten to a point where there are no second tier services anymore, right? Especially with so many people teleworking and so forth, that we just expect everything to be available, and regardless of what it is, it needs to be there when needed. And our expectations for availability are dramatically higher than they were 15 years ago. So that's the very first thing. The death and taxes, yeah, exactly. But well, I mean, it doesn't fail from a customer perspective, right? I mean, we used to. I come from an IT operations background. I was a FreeBSD system administrator when I first started out, for a long time. And the saying we always had is that all hardware fails eventually, right? Every hard drive, every stick of RAM, everything fails. But when we get into what the customer experiences and expects from services, they're expecting no failure from the availability side, so from the service side. So that's the pinnacle of customer experience. Beyond that, if something does fail, we want something that, okay, it failed, but the organization figured out, they were aware of it. I didn't have to call anybody. I didn't have to to interact in any way, shape, or form with the support organization. Yes, it was down. I got an alert that it was down. It came back, fairly quickly. This is, you think about if you have a rare outage with Netflix or something like that, this is kind of where you are with it, right? You're just saying, okay, yeah, it's down right now. We're working on it, and it'll be back very quickly. It's self-healing. The third tier is getting to a resolution through self-service. So with my cable internet provider, I've got, if my service is down, I've got a number I can text, and I just text the word outage, and it lets me know if there's an outage in my area. Oh, okay, there is an outage in my area. So I get back to, that one up above that they're working on it. They tell me it's going to be back in 45 minutes. Not as happy as if it didn't fail, but I don't have to, call anybody or talk to anybody. Alternately, I've got an app that I can use to remotely, reset my modem, and do those things. So I've got some ability through self-service to be able to resolve the issue myself, again, without actually having to interact with anybody or go through, a bunch of Q&A and so forth.
And it's got to be super quick, right? I mean, it has to be
Yeah,
super easy to do, like as easy as, I hate to say reboot the device, but it has to be as easy as like, I'm going to send a text message, I'm going to do press one button,
yeah,
essentially, right? And then hopefully
yeah.
the resolution is actually quick as well.
It's true, Lindsay. I am antisocial and very, very much in these circumstances.
Just
But you
wanted
know,
to
I think
make
a lot of
sure
us are.
everyone
Yeah,
knew that
yeah.
about
No,
you.
I mean, it's I expected it was coming through, but you know, it doesn't hurt to be clear.
Clarity,
Yeah,
important.
exactly, exactly. No, so then when I go to my next tier, uh, this is where I get to the point where I actually have to talk to somebody. I've got to pick up the phone, or go to live chat, or whatever channel I'm going through, and I'm interfacing with somebody, and they're able to resolve my issue. Right, the person I speak to is able to take care of it. Again, I think this is an important thing. There's a couple of important things to talk about here. One is that my level of customer experience and customer satisfaction with this service is dramatically lower the moment I have to interact with somebody. The moment I have to stop doing what I'm doing and go and dedicate my efforts toward resolving this issue, just even if it means sitting on the phone or sitting there in live chat or whatever, is considerably lower than with any of the other options, right? So when we get to that previous, those previous models of service and support, where we really focus on the service desk requiring empathy and business knowledge and those things. Yeah, I mean, I suppose if you're going with that model, those things are still true, but there's just no level of empathy or communication skills that's going to get me to a super high level of satisfaction, because I didn't want to deal with that in the first place.
I'm
Right?
sorry
It's
you're
not.
feeling that way.
Yeah. Thanks, Dad. It does feel better. You're right. Okay, and so then we get to the very bottom of the barrel, and unfortunately, this is what happens in most current service and support organizations. As I speak to somebody at tier one, they aren't actually empowered to solve the problem. They ask me a bunch of questions that and put me through a bunch of troubleshooting steps that I've already done, and then after however much time I spend on that, they escalate it to somebody else. Maybe I go through the same process and so on, but again, we're never going to get to a very high level of customer satisfaction at that point, right? Because we've all come to expect more and better when it comes to that. But again, most of our organizations, if we look at the support model we're using for our clients, we're using things that at best are in that second tier, right? And most of the time we're sitting there at the very bottom of the pyramid. So, core idea here is that when we talk about white glove service, it doesn't necessarily mean that you get a dedicated human that's taking care of you. White glove service now kind of means just getting out of the way, right? Automating things, taking care of these things so I can keep doing my job, so I can keep working, so I can keep, watching White Lotus without interruption or whatever, right? I don't need to interact with a person for those things, and I don't want to. And at the point that I have to interact with, with a human being, I'm already kind of behind the curve. So I'm going to open that up. David, thoughts on that, and anybody else in the chat? Any thoughts, questions, concerns before we move into talking about the actual responsive automation center model?
A couple of thoughts come to mind. I mean, one, there may be some cases, and I think this is coming through a little bit in chat too. There may be some cases when you're staying at the Ritz-Carlton, I'll just use them as an example, and you really, because you're paying a lot of money for it, because you really want that sort of human interaction, that white glove service for certain things. That may be something that you still want in some cases, even though occasionally that would be, in fact, I would argue that in most cases that would be slower and less efficient than if you just did it on your own. But I think what I'd have to say though is that, to me, what we're talking about here, moving out of this model, this isn't something that's just necessarily differentiating. I mean, it might be for a few organizations, but at some point, I think this is just table stakes. This is what people have come to expect. So it's not like, we're going to have the secret weapon here. It's more like, we need to have this to to compete these days.
Yeah, it becomes non-optional, right? That fundamentally it becomes a thing that if you're still delivering a service and support experience that is, legacy, then your customers will ultimately uh, move to a competitor that provides this better or more modern way of working. Now, I think there's one thing that bears recognition here, and that's that um, these things take a while for the industry to shift on, right? We're talking about this model today, but having done this for a lot of years, when we started talking to clients about that single point of contact and the service desk owning incidents and so on, that was kind of introduced to the world in ITIL 3 and I guess to a lesser extent in ITIL 2 in the mid 2000s. And we're just kind of now getting to the point that that's more of a ubiquitous way of working, right? So, or maybe in the last 5 or 6 years. So it takes a while for this to become pervasive through industry. But I also think that what we see is that technological changes and customer expectations are on a bit of an exponential curve. So I don't expect this is going to take 20 years to be a required shift for organizations to make.
I also think, Brian, it's real important to point out that that in talking about shifting to a new model, we're not trying to disrespect the good work that many folks have done on the services if you're managing it. That takes nothing away from the good work that you've done over the years. But I do think it's important to recognize that sometimes what worked really well before isn't working so well in today's environment. And I also think that Laurie here in the chat has a good point that we have to be careful that at some point, if you really do need to get to a human being, you need to get to a human being. But what we're going to be talking about coming up is really making it so that the vast majority of things that you need to do or that need to happen are actually happening without requiring that sort of human intervention.
Yeah, no, that's an excellent point. That we're not talking about human-free support, but I think we're talking about there are times when a mission-critical service is down. If you've got a lot of your major services up in the AWS cloud, and you've got you've got an outage there, you want a human on the phone, right? You may, but we'll talk about that too. But the human you want on the phone is someone that is senior and capable and able to help you resolve your issue, right? You still don't have much patience for that tier 1 person putting you through the script, right? So for major incidents, for big outages and things like that, there's absolutely times when you're going to want to talk to a human. Anyway, David, you want to introduce this model for us?
Yeah, absolutely. So that brings us to today, and what we're calling the Responsive Automation Center. We spent quite a while thinking about what we're going to call this. We knew what we didn't like, what wasn't working, and then we had an idea of what organizations are doing when they're doing this well. But it took a while to come up with the name. But the Responsive Automation Center, what is it? This is a form of support that is advanced. This is supporting the modern environments, the modern ways that we're working. Is if your organization is undergoing a digital transformation, and I know that's kind of like beauty is in the eye of the beholder, but what do I mean? Using technology to work in a significantly different way, getting into new and significantly different businesses, trying to understand and even understand customer expectations, but one of the biggest ones is making sure that availability is up all the time. So that's what we're doing with the Responsive Automation Center. We're using digital technologies that didn't exist 5 or 10 years ago to really try to do better in terms of preventing downtime. We are doing things like trying to embrace new ways of working. So in a nutshell, what the Responsive Automation Center is doing is making it easier for our customers to resolve their own issues through automation. And also, I noticed somebody mentioned in chat, through high quality knowledge articles.
Yep.
Right. And then who is manning this, who is working on this Responsive Automation Center? Well, we have solutions engineers. So we're not talking about your kind of typical tier 1 service desk agent. We're talking about solutions engineers who are trying to make sure that that no incident that requires human intervention, that we're not seeing that twice. You know, we don't want any incidents to come through. That is the perfect state. Quality standard is 100%, meaning 100% availability. But we recognize that from time to time, something's going to go south, going to go down. But when that happens, making sure that that never happens again. So taking a look at that,
Right.
saying, how can we prevent that going forward? How can we, for example, architect a new workflow, a new automation, so that when a customer needs to request something, that they don't have to speak to a human. They could press a few buttons, enter minimal information, and then move on.
So that brings up an interesting point, and we're going to be talking about this more in the coming weeks and months. And I think David's already got a blog article on the Beyond 20 website about this. But metrics for the responsive automation center. When you think about a traditional service desk, the metrics that everybody typically cares about are mean time to restore service, the number of incidents resolved at tier one, the average hold time, and things like that. But what we think is sort of the holy grail metric for the responsive automation center is the number of incidents that require human intervention twice, right? I mean, we want to be trending towards zero on that, but our main key performance indicator is the number of incidents that make it to a person 2 times, and we want to, or more than 2 times. So let's jump right in. We've got a set of core principles around this responsive automation center. 7 core principles that drive this. And the first one is that availability is king. That there's no amount of downtime that's acceptable. And we've kind of talked about that already, so I'm not going to belabor that point. David, you want to take number 2 here?
And the second core principle is that we need to leverage technology and automation to its fullest extent. Technology automation, it helps to make us both more effective and more efficient. And it's freeing up our human beings' time so that they can in turn focus on what they do best, which is make decisions, deal with complexity, things that even our best computers can't fully do yet.
Yep. Okay. And no incident should require human intervention twice. This is something that, as we were going through and building this model and writing the white paper and having a lot of long discussions about it, kept coming up enough that, like, this is a core principle, right? And yeah, in the chat, the OCM is a huge part of this. This is a major cultural shift for a lot of organizations, but I would argue that this cultural shift has already been happening on the development and delivery side. It's just a matter of the support organization keeping up with that, right, and delivering a modern experience for users and for the business, that in the same way that the other side has been doing.
And we believe, really firmly that we need to eliminate tiered support. At one point, maybe it was necessary in the past because we didn't have a great way to get our customers directly to what they need. But the problem is it encourages all sorts of bureaucracy. There's a lot of inefficiency, a lot of waste. And frankly, from a customer satisfaction or customer engagement point of view, it just sinks it, almost immediately as soon as you go to the next tier.
Yep. And another way to put that is that you're going to, by the time you speak to somebody, you're going to be speaking to an expert, right? You're going to be speaking to the service owner or the DevOps engineer or the site reliability engineer that owns that particular service. You're going to be routed to them as the first person you talk to, rather than having to move up the chain. Knowledge sharing. Somebody talked about this in the chat. We still think there's a place for models like KCS, knowledge-centered support, that sharing of knowledge across teams, having a really robust knowledge management database is really, really important. And we're just basically taking that idea of knowledge management and shifting that knowledge left, and then saying, what, as soon as we know the fix for something, or we know that we've got a known issue or whatever, let's make sure that we automate that to the extent that we possibly can as well. Okay. Next.
Yeah, and then making decisions based on data, on both data and observation, right? Talk about that situation where we see the incident occurring twice, or talk about situations where for some reason, capacity on a certain service isn't enough. Using data to make that decision, not just your hunches, but then backing it up with your observations, right? Looking at the trends and then taking a deep dive into it to figure out, do we really need, is this the action that we really need to take, instead of just doing it purely on intuition. And again, these days we have the ability with the technology to do this, properly.
Right. And that supports things like self-healing infrastructure and proactive problem management, where we're trying to prevent incidents and prevent outages from happening in the first place. A lot of that comes from looking at trend analysis and starting to see what types of things cause those. And lastly, then we get to this idea of making work life better, right? It's a little bit of a plug for our core mission at Beyond 20, but fundamentally, this is one of those things that, service desk is a hard job. It always has been. The person that takes that tier 1 support call, that's, there's always a lot of turnover in those roles, because it is a really, really rough job. So
Absolutely.
I lost your audio, Brian.
Yeah, sorry.
Come
You
back
got me now?
Yep.
Okay. Part of this is just recognizing that, people like doing meaningful work, right? And it's much more satisfying to be able to speak to somebody and actually solve a problem for people. A lot of us got into this field because we like to fix things. We like to solve difficult problems and so on. That makes work life better for everybody, both for the people on the customer side and for the engineer that has to take those calls. Right. So, David, why don't you tell us a little bit about the business model here for?
Yeah, so we're calling, the business model for Responsive Automation Center really boils down to what we call 4 domains. In other words, in order for us to be successful as a Responsive Automation Center, these are the 4 things that we really need to do really well. In no particular order here: people empowerment. What do I mean by that? Well, again, we are empowering our Responsive Automation Center solutionists, our solution engineers, to really go out there and automate workflows, to go out there and prevent incidents from happening. But we are also empowering our end user or our end customer. Make it very easy for me to solve my own issue if I have to get to that point. Make it very easy for me to get what I want. Using technology and automation, and I think, in some sense, there's no particular order or hierarchy to these, but I think in a lot of ways, this is kind of like the entry level here. Like, if you want to make this work, you need to be using things like a single pane of glass IT service management platform. You need to really start to have in place robust monitoring. And I don't mean the monitoring that gives you 500 false positives. I mean artificial intelligence enabled monitoring. You need to be leveraging your vendors and your cloud support in intelligent ways. So this will not work really if you're not leveraging that technology. And there are ways to get into that if you're not doing it now.
Do we know anyone who can help with that, David?
Oh, I think we do. Yeah, so certainly at Beyond 20, we use ServiceNow. ServiceNow is a great technology for the single pane of glass platform. We've worked with a number of monitoring and event management solutions that are really heads and heels above in terms of artificial intelligence. So once again, a few years ago, maybe that was a differentiating factor for an organization, but going forward, we really don't have the option. We're gonna all have to be there. When we talk about minimal process and minimal, and adaptation, we mean, I remember in ITIL version 3, we would often teach these, different workflow processes for incident: identify the incident, log it, categorize it, prioritize it. We're talking about here having very lightweight processes here, and then adapting. So if something isn't working, if we notice that something isn't working, very quickly identifying that and changing the way we work. And then, of course, as part of the core principles, we talked about data and observation. You think about, an agile version of the scientific process here. Let me observe what's going on. Let me take a look at the data, which is now available to me at a moment's notice in near real time through technology. And then let me figure out, if I need to do anything, and if I do, what needs to be done very quickly. So these four domains really need to be in place to a large extent to be successful with responsive automation center. But it's not just about what needs to be in place. I imagine that a lot of folks want to have a notion of, okay, this sounds great in theory, but what's the responsive automation center going to do? Could you let us know a little bit more about that, Brian? Like, so what do we do if we're in the responsive automation center?
Yeah, so this is where we get to the actual, operating model here. And I think there's a couple of things to really focus on here. Is that, first of all, I mean, we've talked about the single point of contact kind of being dead. That's a little bit of a misnomer, because we are, from a client perspective, still presenting that single pane of glass, that single interface. And that's, through some sort of an omni-channel portal. But, that could be that I can interface via an SMS text message, or that I go to a portal, or go to live chat, or I pick up the phone, or, well, shouldn't have to pick up the phone, but, I'm interfacing in some way with this service catalog to deal with these incidents and requests, right? Now, on the other side of it, to the far right, we've got, all these various different SRE platform engineering teams. The whole idea behind the single point of contact that, was introduced in that first, that ITIL was really advocating for so much, was that we didn't want to make users know who to call for particular problems. We didn't want them to know, oh, okay, Joe's team owns SAP, and if I've got an issue with Workday, I've got to go over here. And if I have an issue with, this other service, then I've got to contact somebody else. And, I've got this whole call sheet taped up in my cube that tells me who to call for what. We were trying to get rid of that notion entirely, and that still exists. So, I think what you're really talking about here is even expanding that through this omnichannel by having, what ServiceNow calls the Common Services Data Model, CSDM, behind that, everything from HR to facilities to security to IT service management to project and portfolio management is really all controlled with a, a single database, a single data model behind it. And so that as we go through and we do these things, not only can we learn from things that are across different functional areas of the organization, but when we get to, something that we're seeing for the first time, and it's got to go to a person, the system's going to know to get this, that, yeah, this is a problem with our HR platform, our human capital management platform. So this is going to go over to this platform engineer, right? This is going to be the person that's going to be best able to resolve that issue. If it's, something to deal with accounting, then it's going to go over to a different team and so forth. But again, we're trying to make sure what we have here at the very center of the organization is this responsive automation center that may end up being part of, an SMO, a service management office, where, you're basically owning that ServiceNow platform, or, whatever your automation platform is. You're owning that. You're interfacing with, maybe an RPA system or something like that. That's robotic process automation. We're passing, knowledge articles back to self-service. There may still be things that, as an organization, we've decided, yes, we know that's a problem. It's out there, but it's not cost effective for us to actually, fix or resolve this. So, part of that might just be letting people know that, yeah, it's a known issue. We don't have a fix for it, so they don't have to sit and talk to somebody for that as well, if we've made the business decision not to fix it. But and then as we get into, a little bit more, granular view of, say, like the request fulfillment process, again, you've got that customer demand that's coming in through some kind of an omni-channel interface. We've got an automatic authorization that's happening. Is this person authorized to request this? Is this request something that, requires somebody to sign off because it's over a certain dollar figure or whatever? But if it's something that that's in the service catalog that we've seen before, we're going to go right into an RPA, automation of that to take care of that, so humans don't necessarily have to do it. If it's something we haven't seen before, it's the first time this is coming in, then that's going in as an identified opportunity, and the automation engineers in the rack are going to be tasked with automating that and making sure next time somebody asks for that, it's a known issue, it's handled. We're able to handle that without it going to a person. Again, that may be happening. Probably, you've got your ServiceNow platform engineers in the rack that are, automating those things, automating the workflows and so on. They may be working with the people from various teams, right? So when we go back and we look at, these SRE platform engineering teams, the service owners for a specific service, maybe the automation for that, maybe those resources are going to come from across the organization. So there's a certain amount of collaboration that's involved in there. It may also be that, when we see problem management here, that part of what happened is we discovered that there was a single point of failure in the infrastructure that we didn't know about, right? Okay, we're going to automate the provisioning of additional resources, automate failover. You get into infrastructure as code and some of those techniques to start making sure that once we've identified a single point of failure, that we don't have that same thing happen again.
But just to be clear, Brian, we're not talking about having like 15 or 20 people working on the rack, right?
No, that's correct. And again, it'll depend on the size of your organization, but it is safe to say that in terms of headcount, it's a much smaller team than what your current support organization looks like.
Yeah, and it occurs to me that we're not just talking about the future. I mean, in essence, the future is here. There have been some organizations that are out there that we've observed that are doing big chunks of this right now. And those are organizations that probably through trial and error kind of figured out what works really well. And they may be in industries where this has been required. Like they've noticed what is the new norm for their industry, and they've gotten ahead of it. But really, we're talking about, something that exists to an extent, but we're taking this, putting it together in a way that hopefully is easier for other folks to understand and to go from where they are now to this state, and hopefully relatively quickly.
Yeah, agreed. So, what's next? Like I said, we're going to have a lot more material coming out on this topic. This is the very first time we're introducing this to the world. So appreciate any feedback that you have, questions, let us know what you think that we're dead wrong about. Let us know what you think we missed that we haven't thought about. I'm sure there are some of those things. But would love to hear from you. But in the interim, you're going to find articles on beyond20.com/blog. You'll find, articles now on this. The white paper will be coming out in the coming weeks. And we'll have other webinars on, how to get started on this, metrics, staffing, any of those kinds of things. So with that, any questions from the group?
Yes.
Go ahead and read this out loud. So it's focusing inward to use automation to increase efficiency and decrease friction in the user interface. Password resets, ink ordering, report requests. I can see how it forces the user to go through tier 0 self-help. How sophisticated are we talking about though? Isn't this just ITIL with an AI that splits knowledge bases at users and removes tier levels? How do you reallocate your staff so that layoffs are avoided? Yeah, there's a lot there. I can't really address the reallocation of staff because that's going to be different in every organization. What I would my feeling on this though is that this is not likely to be something that you just rip the Band-Aid off and you transition from a legacy model to this overnight, right? That probably what's going to happen is you start transitioning one service at a time in, and over time as people are promoted or you have turnover, then maybe you end up training people up toward automation engineers or what have you. But I don't think you're going to end up with just tomorrow everybody on the service desk is going away because we automated everybody away. That's an unlikely scenario. we are using a lot of, the core ITIL principles here still, but there's, we're not throwing the baby out with the bathwater, as it were. But, the AI element of it is interesting. I think that, that's going to be something that's going to be really interesting. We've all kind of been watching ChatGPT and so forth in the recent weeks and months, and that's evolving pretty rapidly. So, a lot of this will depend on what technologies are available to your organization to work with. In the meantime, even if you don't have, AI or machine learning in place, I still think there's a lot of things that can be done in terms of just saying, look, we know that the fix for this particular outage was to restart this service in IIS or something like that. And, we can use a robotic process automation platform to go out and take care of those things, where we really just have an objective to, again, try to reduce human intervention as much as possible. We're not going to get to zero right away. We might not get to zero in the next, couple of years from launching it, but your key performance indicator is, are we getting closer? Are we getting better? Right.
Yeah, and I think to the ITIL question, I mean, you and I and we've all really grown up with ITIL and have taken.
I've not grown up, David. I resent the implication.
Fair enough. But we've all taken a lot away from ITIL, so no doubt about that. And ITIL is non-prescriptive, right? So in theory, just about anything could fit into the ITIL framework. But I think the one area where this diverges from how ITIL normally talks about this, really, or the key area, I should say, is the whole single point of contact. We are not saying that we don't care about the customer experience. In fact, we do care about that primarily. What we are saying, though, is that customer experience isn't really shaped the same way it has always been, right? It's not about, me showing extreme empathy and having a very nice, tenor to my voice and really trying to put myself in your shoes. We're saying that that's important, but what's much more important is making sure that things don't go down in the first place. And if I'm the customer, especially for something that should have never gone down or something that should be easy to get, giving me the tools, empowering me to get that done myself, and it's got to be easy. It's got to be quick. I don't want to have to sit there and read a long manual or long knowledge article to do it. I need it to be quick. And I think that's something that, when we talk about service desk, when we talk about incident management, things like that in ITIL, we don't stress it, we don't stress it as much, because a lot of organizations are still using those other models.
Yeah, absolutely. So it is now time. So I want to be respectful of, I know everybody has pretty busy schedules these days. So thank you, everybody, for being here today. And like I said, there'll be a lot more to come. We'll have a copy of the recording going out to everybody in the next 24 to 48 hours. And look forward to hearing from you with any questions that you have. Feel free to email us or reach out through the live chat on the website. Thank you. Take care.
Thanks,
Thank you.
everybody.